The ocean stretched far and wide, its surface calm but hiding secrets below. Deep beneath the waves, a young mermaid named Ada swam lazily, staring up at the faint shimmer of sunlight breaking through the water. She wasn't like the other mermaids, not really. While they were content with singing and dancing in their underwater kingdom, Ada always felt like something was missing. She didn't know exactly what it was, but she felt it deep in her chest, a strange ache for something more. It wasn't until she started listening to the sailors above that she began to understand. Their loud voices carried through the waves, full of laughter, songs, and sometimes arguments. But what caught Ada's attention most was the way they talked about love. They told stories about people finding someone special, someone who made their hearts feel full. It sounded so wonderful, so magical, that Ada couldn't stop thinking about it. Love, she whispered one day, sitting on a smooth rock near her favorite coral reef. What does it feel like? Her best friend, Ifeanyi, a cheerful mermaid with bright green fins, giggled as she flipped through the water. You're dreaming again, Ada. Love, that's for humans. They're strange, always walking around on those two legs of theirs. But doesn't it sound amazing? Ada asked, her big, curious eyes glowing. What if there's someone out there? Someone who would love me for who I am? Don't you ever wonder? Ifeanyi shook her head firmly. Not me. Humans are trouble. Haven't you heard the stories? They hunt us, Ada. They're selfish and greedy. You're better off staying right here where it's safe. But Ada wasn't convinced. The stories might have been true, but the sailors didn't seem so bad. She had watched them for years, laughing and working together, sharing stories and meals. Surely not all humans were cruel. One evening, as the waves rolled gently and the sky above turned shades of pink and orange, Ada made a decision. She couldn't ignore the longing in her heart anymore. She had to see the human world for herself, and she knew exactly who to ask for help. The elder mermaid, Mama Iridi, lived in a cave surrounded by glowing sea plants. She was ancient, her tail faded and her eyes clouded, but she was wise beyond words. Most mermaids only came to her in times of great need, for Mama Iridi's magic was powerful but came with heavy consequences. When Ada swam into the cave, her heart was pounding. Mama Iridi was sitting on a stone throne, her gaze distant but sharp. Young one, the elder said in a deep, steady voice. What brings you here? Ada hesitated for a moment, then swam closer. Mama Iridi, I want to go to the human world. I want to see it for myself. The elder's eyes narrowed. You're asking for trouble, child. The human world is not kind to those who are different. I know, Ada said quickly, but I can't stay here forever. I need to know what it feels like to live on land, to meet people who might love me for who I am. Mama Iridi sighed, her voice heavy with warning. Love is not as simple as it sounds, Ada. Humans are complicated. They will hurt you if you're not careful. I'll be careful, Ada promised. Please, Mama Iridi. I'll do anything. The elder studied her for a long time before speaking again. There is a way, but it will not be easy. I can give you the ability to live among them. Your tail will transform, but you will not walk. Instead, you will need to use a human device called a wheelchair. A wheelchair? Ada asked, frowning. It is a chair with wheels that humans use to move if their legs are weak or broken, Mama Iridi explained. You will be seen as different, and humans do not always treat those who are different with kindness. But if you are brave, you may find what you are looking for. Ada nodded firmly. I'll do it. The elder smiled faintly, though her eyes remained sad. Very well. The spell will last 3 months. If you do not return to the sea by then, you will lose your voice forever. Do you understand? Ada hesitated, her heart thumping. Her voice was one of her most precious gifts, but her desire to explore the human world burned brighter. I understand. Mama Iridi began chanting in a low, melodic voice, and a swirling light surrounded Ada. She felt her tail begin to change, her fins shrinking and reshaping until they were thin, weak legs. When the light faded, Ada looked down at herself in amazement. Go now, Mama Iridi said. You will find a wheelchair waiting for you on the shore. Use it wisely. And remember, you are not like them. Be cautious. Ada nodded, her chest tight with a mix of excitement and fear. Thank you, Mama Iridi. I won't forget. The beach was quiet when Ada emerged from the water for the first time. She crawled awkwardly onto the sand, her legs trembling and useless. Nearby, she spotted the wheelchair Mama Iridi had mentioned. It was strange-looking, with large wheels and a padded seat, but she managed to climb into it after a few tries. Ada looked out at the endless horizon. She was finally here in the human world. The thought filled her with both wonder and nervousness. What would it be like? Would humans accept her? Would she find the love she dreamed of? She didn't have all the answers, but she was ready to find out. With her hands gripping the wheels of the chair, Ada rolled forward, leaving the ocean behind her. Ada sat in the wheelchair, rolling herself carefully along the uneven path that led from the beach to the small town she had seen from the water. Her heart raced with a mix of fear and excitement. Everything around her felt strange. The air smelled different, with a mix of salt and earth. The ground was solid beneath her wheels, unlike the endless flow of the ocean. She was no longer surrounded by fish and coral, but by strange towering trees and the distant hum of human voices. Ahead, the buildings of her new school rose in the distance. It was a large, intimidating place with high walls and gates. Children and teenagers were walking in, chatting and laughing. Some were pulling suitcases, others carried bags slung over their shoulders. Ada's hands tightened on the wheelchair's wheels. She hadn't thought this far ahead. What if they stared? What if they laughed at her? She took a deep breath and reminded herself why she was here. She wanted to learn about humans. She wanted to find someone who would care for her as she was. Fins or no fins. You can do this, she whispered to herself, rolling forward slowly but steadily. The schoolyard buzzed with energy as students greeted friends and shared stories about their holidays. Nobody seemed to notice Ada at first, which gave her a small sense of relief. But as she moved further into the crowd, heads began to turn. Who's that? A girl whispered loudly to her friend. I don't know, the friend replied, her eyes glued to Ada. She's in a wheelchair? Ada kept her face calm, though her heart pounded. She knew humans would see her as different, but it was still hard to feel their eyes on her. She focused on getting to the large building in front of her, where a teacher in a bright yellow blouse stood holding a clipboard. Good morning, the teacher said kindly as Ada approached. You must be the new scholarship student. Ada, right? Yes, Ada replied, her voice steady. She tried to smile, but the teacher's gaze lingered a little too long on her wheelchair. Ada quickly looked away. Well, welcome. I'm Mrs. Ajayi, and I'll help you get settled. Let me show you to your dormitory. Mrs. Ajayi began walking briskly, and Ada struggled to keep up, rolling her wheelchair over the bumpy stone path. Along the way, they passed more students, many of whom paused their conversations to stare at her. Some whispered, others just looked surprised. One boy, tall and broad-shouldered, stood in the middle of a group of laughing students. When Ada rolled by, he smirked. Looks like we've got someone special this year, he said loudly, making sure everyone around him could hear. The group erupted into laughter, and Ada's cheeks burned. She kept her eyes on the ground, pretending not to hear, but her heart sank. Was this how humans treated people who were different? That's Tunji, Mrs. Ajayi said quietly, glancing back at the group. Don't mind him. He can be a bit difficult. Difficult? That didn't seem like the right word. Mean maybe. Cruel definitely. Ada's dormitory was small but neat, with 2 bunk beds, a desk, and a small wardrobe. 2 girls were already there when she arrived, chatting and laughing as they unpacked their things. They stopped talking the moment Ada rolled in. Oh, one of the girls said, her eyes widening. She was tall and slim, with her hair tied in neat braids. You're in a wheelchair? Yes, Ada said simply, wheeling herself toward the empty corner of the room. The other girl, shorter and round-faced, nudged her friend. I told you she was the scholarship student. My cousin said she's from a poor village. I'm right here, Ada said firmly, her voice calm but steady. You don't need to talk about me like I can't hear you. The taller girl blinked, surprised by Ada's confidence. Oh, sorry. I'm Titi. This is Bola. Nice to meet you, Ada said politely, though she could tell they were still uncomfortable around her. She turned her attention to unpacking the small bag she had brought with her. She didn't have much, just a few clothes and the human books she had collected from shipwrecks over the years. Titi and Bola exchanged a glance but said nothing more. They returned to their conversation, occasionally glancing at Ada but keeping their voices low. Later that day, the school held a welcoming assembly for all the new students. Ada rolled herself into the large hall, which was already packed with students sitting on rows of benches. She found an empty space near the back and settled in quietly. As the principal gave a long speech about the school's history and values, Ada couldn't help but notice the way people kept sneaking glances at her. Some whispered, some giggled. She tried to ignore them, focusing instead on the principal's words. But it wasn't easy. When the assembly ended, the students began filing out of the hall. Ada waited for the crowd to thin before rolling toward the door. Just as she reached the exit, someone blocked her path. Well, Tunji said, grinning down at her. The new girl. What's your name again? Oh, wait. Let me guess. Scholarship Ada? Ada met his gaze, her face calm despite the anger bubbling inside her. It's just Ada, she said. Excuse me. Tunji didn't move. You know, I've never met someone like you before. I mean, how do you even keep up with everyone? Do they push you around all day? Laughter erupted from the group behind him, and Ada's hands tightened on the wheels of her chair. I don't need anyone to push me, she said firmly. Now move. Tunji raised his hands in mock surrender, stepping aside just enough for her to pass. Relax, I'm just curious. You're interesting, that's all. Ada didn't respond. She rolled past him, her heart pounding. She could feel their laughter following her down the hall, but she didn't look back. By the time Ada made it to the garden behind the dormitories, she was shaking with frustration. The garden was quiet and peaceful, filled with colorful flowers and tall, swaying trees. It reminded her a little of the coral reefs back home. She found a shady spot near a small fountain and took a deep breath, letting the sound of trickling water calm her nerves. They're just humans, she told herself softly. They don't know who you really are. But that didn't make their words hurt any less. Was this what Mama Iridi had meant when she warned her about humans? They were quick to judge, quick to mock. Ada had hoped to find kindness here, but all she had found so far was cruelty. Are you okay? The voice startled her, and she turned to see a boy standing a few feet away. He was holding a book, his glasses slightly crooked on his nose. His eyes were kind, and there was no trace of mockery in his expression. I'm fine, Ada said quickly, sitting up straighter. The boy hesitated, then walked closer. I saw what happened earlier, with Tunji. He's not a nice person. Ada gave a small shrug. I can handle him. The boy smiled faintly. I'm Emika, by the way. You're Ada, right? Yes, she said, studying him carefully. He didn't seem like the others. There was something different about him, something gentle. I like to come here to read, Emika said, holding up his book. It's quieter than the dorms. Do you mind if I sit here? Ada shook her head. It's fine. Emika sat on the edge of the fountain, opening his book but glancing at her every now and then. After a while, he spoke again. You know, I think it's really brave of you to come here. Brave? Ada asked, raising an eyebrow. Yeah, Emika said. Most people wouldn't be able to handle what you're dealing with. But you seem strong. Ada wasn't sure how to respond to that. No one had ever called her strong before. Thanks, she said quietly. They sat in silence for a while, the sound of the fountain filling the space between them. For the first time since she arrived, Ada felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe not all humans were bad. Maybe, just maybe, she could find what she was looking for here. The next morning, Ada wheeled herself into the dining hall for breakfast. The room was buzzing with chatter, laughter, and the clinking of cutlery against plates. She tried to blend in, but the whispers started almost immediately. Did you see her yesterday? The girl in the wheelchair? Yeah. What's her story? Why is she even here? I heard she's from a tiny village. Probably begged her way in. Ada kept her eyes on the floor, gripping the wheels of her chair tightly. She didn't want to react, didn't want to give them the satisfaction of knowing she could hear them. But their words stung. They didn't know anything about her, yet they judged her so easily. She rolled over to an empty table at the corner of the hall, far from the groups of noisy students. As she picked at her bread and eggs, she heard footsteps approaching. She looked up to see Emeka standing there, holding his tray. "Is this seat taken?" he asked, pointing to the chair opposite her. Ada shook her head. "No, you can sit." Emeka smiled and sat down. "Morning," he said cheerfully. "How's your first full day going?" Ada shrugged. "It's fine." Emeka studied her for a moment, then leaned in a little. "You don't have to act tough, you know. I heard what they were saying too." Ada's face hardened. "Let them talk. I don't care." "Really?" Emeka said, raising an eyebrow. "Because it looks like you do." Ada didn't reply. She didn't want to admit that he was right. Instead, she stared down at her plate, pushing a piece of bread around with her fork. "They're just jealous," Emeka said after a moment. Ada frowned and looked up. "Jealous? Of what?" "Of you," Emeka said simply. "You're different. You stand out. People don't know how to handle that, so they make up stories. It's easier for them to laugh than to try to understand." Ada blinked, surprised by his words. "You really think that?" "I know it," Emeka said firmly. "And trust me, you're not the first person they've treated like this. But you're handling it better than most." Ada felt a small smile tug at her lips. Emeka had a way of making her feel seen, like she wasn't just the girl in the wheelchair everyone whispered about. She didn't know why he was being so kind, but she was grateful. The whispers only grew louder as the days went on. Everywhere Ada went, she felt eyes on her. In the classrooms, the hallways, even in the garden where she usually found peace. There were always students watching her, whispering behind her back. One afternoon, as she wheeled herself toward the library, she overheard a group of girls standing by the staircase. "She's so weird," one of them said. "I heard she can't even walk because of some disease," another added. "Or maybe she's just pretending," the first girl said with a laugh. "You know, to get sympathy." Ada stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding. She wanted to turn around and confront them, to tell them they didn't know anything about her. But she knew it wouldn't help. They would just laugh and whisper more. So she kept moving, trying to block out their voices. As she entered the library, she spotted Emeka sitting at a table near the window, a stack of books in front of him. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. "Hey," he said as she rolled over to join him. "You okay? You look upset." Ada hesitated, then shook her head. "It's nothing. Just people being people." Emeka frowned. "What happened?" "More rumors," Ada said, her voice bitter. "They think I'm faking it now. Like I would choose this." Emeka's expression darkened. "That's ridiculous. Why would anyone think that?" "Because they don't want to believe that someone like me belongs here," Ada said quietly. "I'm different, and they can't handle it." Emeka leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "They're idiots. Don't let them get to you." "It's not that easy," Ada said. "You don't know what it's like to be stared at all the time, to have people talk about you like you're not even human." Emeka's face softened. "You're right. I don't know what that's like, but I do know that you're stronger than they are. You're here for a reason, Ada. Don't let them take that away from you." Ada looked at him, her chest tightening. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that she was strong enough to handle this. But the whispers, the stares, the laughter, it was all starting to wear her down. The rumors took a new turn after Tunji decided to get involved. One evening, as Ada was heading back to her dorm, she found him and his group of friends waiting for her outside the building. Well, if it isn't the star of the school," Tunji said with a grin. "How's life in the wheelchair, Ada?" Ada stopped, her jaw tightening. "What do you want, Tunji?" "Oh, nothing," Tunji said, his voice dripping with mockery. "We're just curious, about your situation." Ada crossed her arms. "What situation?" One of his friends chimed in, smirking. "The whole wheelchair thing is kind of Suspicious, don't you think? What's suspicious about it? Ada asked, her voice cold. Well, Tunji said, stepping closer, how do we know it's real? Maybe you're just pretending to get special treatment. Scholarships, extra help, attention. It's a smart move, really. Ada's hands clenched into fists. You don't know anything about me. I know enough, Tunji said, his grin widening. And so does everyone else. Face it, Ada. You're just a charity case. Before Ada could respond, Emeka appeared out of nowhere, stepping between her and Tunji. That's enough, he said firmly, his voice low but steady. Tunji raised an eyebrow. Oh look, it's her little defender. What are you going to do, Emeka? Read me a poem? Emeka didn't flinch. Leave her alone, Tunji. You've made your point. Have I? Tunji said, leaning closer. Because I said, leave her alone, Emeka repeated, his voice louder this time. For a moment there was silence. Tunji stared at Emeka, his grin fading slightly. Then he laughed, shaking his head. Fine, whatever. Let's go, guys. As Tunji and his friends walked away, Ada let out a shaky breath. You didn't have to do that, she said, her voice soft. Yes, I did, Emeka said, turning to face her. Someone had to. Ada looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. She didn't know why he cared so much, but she was glad he did. For the first time since she arrived, she felt like she wasn't completely alone. The school garden became Ada's favorite place. It was tucked behind the main dormitories, quiet and peaceful, with flowers of every color blooming in neat rows. There was a small fountain in the middle, and the sound of water trickling over the stones reminded Ada of the ocean. She liked sitting there, away from the noise and stares, where she could think and breathe. One afternoon, after another long day of whispers and pointed looks, Ada wheeled herself into the garden. She stopped by her usual spot near the fountain, letting the warmth of the sun calm her nerves. But even in the quiet, her mind was noisy with thoughts. Why do they hate me? She murmured to herself. I haven't done anything to them. She closed her eyes, thinking about her home in the sea. It had felt so small, so empty. But at least there, she had never been treated like this. The whispers, the laughter, it was like they wanted her to feel small, to feel like she didn't belong. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. Are you talking to yourself? Or is there someone hiding in those bushes? Ada opened her eyes and turned to see Emeka standing a few steps away, a book in his hand. He was smiling, but his eyes looked concerned. It's just me, Ada said, managing a small smile. No one in the bushes. Emeka walked closer, sitting on the edge of the fountain. I thought I'd find you here, he said. You didn't look too happy after class. Ada shrugged. I'm fine. You always say that, Emeka replied, leaning forward. But I know you're not. Ada sighed. Why do you care so much, Emeka? Everyone else seems to think I'm just here for attention. I'm not everyone else, Emeka said simply. And I don't think you're here for attention. I think you're here because you deserve to be. Ada looked at him, her chest tightening. She wanted to believe him, but it was hard. You don't know what it's like, she said quietly. Everywhere I go, people stare. They talk about me like I'm some kind of freak. You're not a freak, Emeka said firmly. You're brave. Braver than any of them. Ada shook her head. I don't feel brave. I feel tired. Emeka was silent for a moment. Then he smiled. Do you know what I do when I feel tired? What? Ada asked, curious despite herself. I read poetry, Emeka said, holding up his book. It helps me forget about everything else for a while. Want me to read you something? Ada hesitated, then nodded. Okay. Emeka opened his book and began reading. His voice was soft and steady, the words flowing like music. Ada didn't understand all of it, but there was something soothing about the way he read. It made her feel lighter, like the weight on her chest wasn't as heavy. When he finished, Emeka looked at her and smiled. Feel better? A little, Ada admitted, smiling back. They started meeting in the garden regularly after that. Emeka would bring a new book each time, and they would talk about the poems, the stories, and sometimes their lives. Ada didn't share much about herself. She couldn't. but she liked listening to Emeka. He talked about his family, his dreams, and the things that made him happy. It was nice, having someone who didn't judge her, who treated her like she was just Ada. One afternoon, as they sat by the fountain, Emeka turned to her with a thoughtful look. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure," Ada said, tilting her head. "Why don't you ever talk about your past?" Emeka asked. "Where you're from, your family, anything." Ada's stomach tightened. She had been careful not to reveal too much about herself, but she knew this question would come eventually. "It's complicated," she said slowly. Emeka frowned. "Complicated how?" I don't like talking about it," Ada said, avoiding his gaze. "It's not a happy story." Emeka nodded, his expression softening. "Okay, you don't have to tell me if you're not ready. I just want you to know that you can." Ada looked at him, surprised by his kindness. "Thanks," she said quietly. They sat in silence for a while, the sound of the fountain filling the air. Ada felt a strange mix of emotions. Gratitude, relief, but also fear. She liked Emeka. He made her feel safe, like she could be herself around him. But she knew she couldn't tell him the truth. Not yet. The peace Ada found in the garden didn't last long. One day, as she and Emeka were talking, a voice broke through the quiet. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Ada and Emeka turned to see Tunji standing at the edge of the garden, his arms crossed and a smirk on his face. Behind him were two of his friends, both looking just as smug. "What do you want, Tunji?" Emeka asked, his voice calm but firm. "Nothing much," Tunji said, strolling closer. "Just wondering what you two lovebirds are up to." Ada's face burned, but she kept her expression neutral. "We're talking. Not that it's any of your business." Tunji raised an eyebrow. "Talking? Is that what they're calling it now? I didn't know you were into charity cases." Emeka, "Leave her alone," Emeka said, standing up. Tunji laughed. "Relax, I'm just joking. No need to get all defensive." "It's not funny," Emeka said, his voice steady. "You think you're so clever, but all you're doing is proving how small-minded you are." Tunji's smirk faded slightly, replaced by a hint of annoyance. "Watch it, Emeka. You don't want to make this personal." "It already is," Emeka said. "Now, if you're done, you can leave." For a moment it looked like Tunji might argue, but then he shrugged and turned away. "Fine. Enjoy your little garden date. Let's go, guys." As Tunji and his friends walked off, Ada let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "You didn't have to do that," she said, looking up at Emeka. "Yes, I did," Emeka replied, sitting back down. "Someone has to stand up to him." Ada smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. She didn't know why Emeka cared so much, but she was glad he did. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a real friend. The school buzzed with excitement as the upcoming inter-house debate competition drew near. It was one of the biggest events of the term, and everyone was talking about it. Ada had been chosen to represent her house as one of the speakers, a decision that surprised many. Titi had whispered loudly in the dorm one evening. "Why her? She can't even stand up to give a proper speech." Ada ignored the comment, but inside, her stomach churned. She wasn't afraid of speaking in front of people, but she knew the attention would bring more whispers and stares. Still, she was determined to prove herself. She had worked hard on her speech, practicing late into the night while others slept. On the day of the debate, the auditorium was packed. Students filled the seats, chatting excitedly as they waited for the event to start. Ada sat at her designated spot on the stage, her heart pounding. She glanced at the crowd, catching sight of Tunji and his friends sitting near the front. His smirk made her nerves spike, but she forced herself to look away. "You've got this," Emeka whispered as he passed by, giving her a reassuring nod. He wasn't competing, but he had promised to come and support her. His encouragement steadied her nerves, and she took a deep breath, clutching the edge of her wheelchair. The debate began, and the first few speakers delivered their arguments with confidence. Ada's turn was coming up, and she could feel the weight of the audience's eyes on her. When her name was called, a ripple of whispers spread through the room. "She's really going up there? How's she going to do it from the wheelchair?" This is going to be a disaster. Ada ignored them, rolling herself forward to the center of the stage. The microphone was already adjusted to her height, but she could feel the skepticism radiating from the crowd. She took a deep breath and began her speech. Her voice was steady, clear, and filled with conviction. She spoke passionately about the topic, her words flowing effortlessly. Slowly, the whispers died down, replaced by attentive silence. Even the teachers on the judging panel nodded approvingly. Ada felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she was winning them over. But as she reached the climax of her argument, something unexpected happened. A loud, shrill beep echoed through the auditorium, followed by a series of jarring sounds. The microphone screeched, and the audience gasped. Ada froze, her words caught in her throat. "What's happening?" someone shouted. The microphone cut off completely, and a voice rang out from the speakers. It was Tunji, laughing loudly. "Sorry, folks, just a little technical difficulty. Guess the system couldn't handle all that." Inspiration, laughter erupted from the audience, and Ada's cheeks burned. She turned to see Tunji sitting smugly in the front row, his phone in his hand. He had hacked into the sound system. Ada gripped the armrests of her wheelchair, her heart racing. She wanted to say something, to fight back, but the humiliation was overwhelming. The audience continued to laugh, and the judges exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Enough," Emika's voice rang out, cutting through the noise. He stood up from his seat, glaring at Tunji. "That's enough, Tunji." Tunji leaned back, pretending to look innocent. "What? I didn't do anything. Everyone knows it was you," Emika said, his voice firm. "You think this is funny? Ruining someone's moment just because you're jealous?" "Jealous?" Tunji scoffed, his smirk faltering slightly. "Of what?" "Of someone who has more courage in her little finger than you'll ever have," Emika shot back. Ada didn't need to stand up to be heard, and you couldn't stand it, could you? The room fell silent. All eyes were on Emika, who stared Tunji down without flinching. Tunji's smirk disappeared completely, replaced by a scowl. "Whatever," Tunji muttered, sinking into his seat. Emika turned to Ada, his eyes softening. "Go on," he said. "You've got this." Ada hesitated, her throat tight with emotion. But as she looked at Emika and saw the belief in his eyes, something inside her steadied. She rolled back to the microphone, which had been reconnected, and finished her speech. Her voice was quieter this time, but her words were just as powerful. When she was done, the audience erupted into applause. Not everyone clapped, but it was enough to make Ada's chest swell with pride. She had done it despite everything. After the debate, Ada stayed behind in the auditorium, needing a moment to collect herself. She was still shaking, her hands gripping the edges of her wheelchair tightly. "You were amazing." She looked up to see Emika standing in front of her, his usual book tucked under his arm. His face was filled with admiration. "Thanks," Ada said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I mean it," Emika said, sitting down beside her. "You didn't let him win. You kept going, and that's what matters." Ada nodded slowly. "It was hard. I thought about giving up." "But you didn't," Emika said. "And that's why he'll never beat you." Ada felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. "Why are you always so nice to me?" she asked. "You don't even know me." Emika smiled. "I don't need to know everything about you to see how special you are. You're strong, Ada. Stronger than you realize." His words hit her like a wave, filling her with a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time since she arrived at the school, she believed she might actually belong. And it was all because of Emika. "Thank you," she said softly, meeting his gaze. "Always," Emika replied, his smile never wavering. But not everyone shared Emika's kindness. Tunji wasn't done with Ada yet. Later that evening, as Ada made her way back to the dormitory, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see Tunji and his friends, their faces set in matching scowls. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" Tunji said, stepping closer. Ada held her ground, her hands steady on the wheels of her chair. "What do you want?" Tunji, I want you to know your place, Tunji said, his voice low and dangerous. You don't belong here. You're just a charity case, a pity project. Ada's heart raced, but she refused to show fear. If I don't belong here, then prove it, she said. Beat me in something fair. Not with your cheap tricks. Tunji's face twisted with anger, but before he could respond, a voice interrupted. Leave her alone. Emeka appeared out of the shadows, his stance firm and his expression unwavering. I'm serious, Tunji. Walk away. Tunji hesitated, his friends shifting uncomfortably behind him. Finally, he sneered. Whatever. She's not worth it. As Tunji and his friends left, Emeka turned to Ada. Are you okay? Ada nodded, her heart pounding. I'm fine. Thank you. You don't have to thank me, Emeka said. But you do need to be careful. Tunji doesn't like losing. I can handle him, Ada said, though her voice wavered slightly. I know you can, Emeka said, his tone gentle. But you don't have to do it alone. Ada looked at him, her chest tightening. She was grateful. With Emeka by her side, she felt like she could face anything. The school camping trip had been the talk of the week. Everyone was excited about spending a few days by the serene lake surrounded by lush green hills. Ada wasn't as thrilled. The idea of being far from the garden, her safe space, made her uneasy. But Emeka had convinced her to go. It'll be fun, he'd said, his eyes lighting up. You need a break from all the drama here. And besides, I'll be there. Ada had reluctantly agreed, and now she found herself sitting in the back of the school bus, her wheelchair folded neatly beside her. The bus was alive with chatter and laughter, but Ada stayed quiet, looking out the window as the scenery whizzed by. Emeka sat beside her, flipping through one of his books. Are you nervous? He asked, glancing at her. A little, Ada admitted. I'm not really an outdoor person. Well, you'll have me as your guide, Emeka said with a grin. We'll stick together. Ada smiled faintly, grateful for his presence. But deep down, a knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. The campsite was beautiful, with rows of tents set up near the sparkling lake. The teachers gave a short briefing, explaining the rules and activities planned for the trip. Ada was assigned a tent with 2 other girls, but they barely spoke to her, exchanging awkward smiles before going off to join their friends. Ada wheeled herself to the edge of the lake, where Emeka was skipping stones across the water. She watched him for a moment, the peaceful setting easing her nerves. Hey, Emeka said, spotting her. Come try this. Ada raised an eyebrow. Skipping stones? It's easy, Emeka said, handing her a smooth, flat rock. Just flick your wrist like this. Ada took the rock and threw it, but it sank immediately with a loud plop. Emeka laughed, and Ada couldn't help but laugh too. Okay, maybe not so easy, she said. You'll get the hang of it, Emeka said, skipping another stone effortlessly. It's all about practice. They spent the afternoon by the lake, talking and laughing. For the first time in weeks, Ada felt a sense of normalcy. But as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden light across the water, her unease returned. That night, after dinner around the campfire, Ada wheeled herself back to her tent, exhaustion settling in. But before she could get inside, a shadow loomed over her. Well, look who's here, Tunji's voice drawled. Ada's heart sank. She turned to see him standing there with his usual group of followers. Their faces were lit with the same smug expressions that always made her stomach churn. What do you want, Tunji? Ada asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Oh, nothing, Tunji said, grinning. Just thought we'd invite you to a little adventure. Ada frowned. I'm not interested. Come on, Tunji said, stepping closer. Don't be boring. We're just going down to the lake. You love the water, don't you? Ada froze. Something about his tone sent a chill down her spine. She gripped the wheels of her chair, ready to roll away, but one of Tunji's friends stepped in front of her, blocking her path. What's wrong? Tunji asked mockingly. Afraid you'll get wet? Leave me alone, Ada said firmly. But Tunji ignored her, leaning down so his face was level with hers. You think you're so special, don't you? Rolling around like you're better than us. I don't think that, Ada said, her voice shaking. Sure you do, Tunji said, his grin widening. Well, let's see how special you really are. Before Ada could react, Tunji grabbed the handles of her wheelchair and started pushing her toward the lake. Ada struggled, panic rising in her chest. Stop! Let me go! She shouted. Relax, Tunji said, laughing. It's just a little swim. The lake's edge came into view, the moonlight reflecting off the water. Ada's heart pounded as she realized what Tunji was planning. Please, don't do this, she pleaded, her voice cracking. Too late, Tunji said, his laughter echoing in the still night. He pushed her chair to the very edge of the water and stopped. Ready for a splash? Tunji, stop, Emika's voice rang out, cutting through the tension like a blade. Everyone turned to see Emika running toward them, his face twisted in anger. He shoved Tunji aside, stepping between him and Ada. What's wrong with you? Emika shouted. Are you out of your mind? We were just having fun, Tunji said, his grin faltering. This isn't fun, Emika snapped. This is bullying. You think this makes you look cool? It doesn't. It makes you look pathetic. Tunji's face darkened. Stay out of this, Emika. It doesn't concern you. It concerns me when you mess with my friends, Emika said, his voice firm. Now back off. For a moment, it looked like Tunji might argue, but then he sneered and stepped back. Whatever. Let's go, guys. As Tunji and his friends walked away, Emika turned to Ada. Are you okay? Ada nodded shakily, but tears welled up in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. You don't have to thank me, Emika said softly. Let's get you back to your tent. But as Emika wheeled Ada away from the lake, she felt a strange pull in her chest. She glanced back at the water, its surface rippling under the moonlight. It called to her, a deep, familiar longing she couldn't ignore. Wait, she said suddenly. Stop. What is it? Emika asked, concerned. I need a moment, Ada said, her voice trembling. Can you leave me here? Just for a little while? Emika hesitated, then nodded. Okay, but call me if you need anything. As Emika walked away, Ada turned back to the lake. She rolled herself to the edge, staring at her reflection in the water. Her secret felt heavier than ever, pressing down on her chest like a weight. I can't keep hiding, she whispered. Taking a deep breath, Ada leaned forward and let herself slide into the water. The moment her body touched the cool surface, a familiar sensation washed over her. Her legs shimmered and transformed back into her tail, the silver scales gleaming under the moonlight. For a moment, she felt free, gliding through the water like she belonged. But then she heard a sharp gasp behind her. Ada! She turned to see Emika standing at the edge of the lake, his eyes wide with shock. Her heart dropped. He had seen everything. The moment Emika's voice echoed through the night, Ada's heart froze. She turned in the water, her tail shimmering under the moonlight, and locked eyes with him. His face was a mix of confusion, fear, and disbelief. Emika, she said softly, her voice trembling. What? He stammered, his hand gripping the trunk of a tree for support. What are you? Ada's chest tightened. She wanted to dive back into the depths, to hide where no one could see her. But something about Emika's voice stopped her. He sounded scared, but not angry, not disgusted. I can explain, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Emika took a cautious step closer to the edge of the lake, his eyes never leaving her tail. You're not human? I am, Ada said quickly. At least part of me is. I'm different. Different? Emika repeated, his voice shaky. You have a tail, Ada. He hesitated, struggling to find the words. A mermaid, Ada finished for him. Yes, I am. Emika stared at her, his breathing uneven. Ada felt a sharp pang of fear. She had been careful, so careful to keep her secret. But now it was out. Emika knew, and she had no idea what he would do with that knowledge. Why didn't you tell me? Emika finally asked, his voice quiet. Ada looked down at the water, her reflection rippling under her gaze. I was scared, she admitted. I didn't know how you'd react. I thought you'd hate me. Hate you? Emeka said, his voice rising slightly. Ada, you've been lying to me this whole time. I thought we were friends. I thought you trusted me. I do trust you, Ada said desperately. But how could I tell you something like this? Look at me, Emeka. I'm not like you. I don't belong here. Emeka ran a hand through his hair, his expression torn. I don't understand. How is this even possible? Why are you here? Why pretend to be? He gestured to the wheelchair, his voice faltering. Because I wanted to be part of this world. Ada said, her voice breaking. I wanted to know what it's like to live on land, to have friends, to maybe find someone who would love me for who I am. But I couldn't walk. This wheelchair was the only way I could blend in. Emeka was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on her tail. So everything you told me, it was all a lie? No, Ada said quickly, her voice filled with emotion. Not everything. The way I feel about you, Emeka, that's real. I swear it is. Emeka's eyes softened slightly, but the confusion and hurt were still there. I don't know what to think. Ada, this is a lot. I know, Ada said, her voice trembling. I know it's a lot, and I'm so sorry, but I didn't want you to find out like this. Why did you come to the lake? Emeka asked, his voice quiet again. Why now? I couldn't hide anymore, Ada admitted. When Tunji pushed me to the edge, I felt like I couldn't keep pretending. This lake, the water, it's where I feel like myself. Emeka nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. And now you know everything, Ada said, her voice breaking. And if you want to walk away, I'll understand. I wouldn't blame you. Emeka sat down at the edge of the lake, his feet just inches from the water. He stared at the ripples, his face unreadable. Ada watched him, her heart pounding. She wanted to say something, to explain more, but the words wouldn't come. Finally, Emeka looked up at her. I'm not walking away. Ada blinked, surprised. You're not? No, Emeka said firmly. I don't know what this means, or how any of this is going to work, but I'm not leaving you. Tears filled Ada's eyes. Why? After everything, why would you stay? Because you're still Ada, Emeka said, his voice steady. You're still the girl who listens to my poetry, who stands up to Tunji, who makes me laugh even when I'm having a bad day. You're still my friend. Ada's chest tightened, and for the first time in a long while, she felt hope. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Emeka smiled faintly. But we need to figure out what happens next. The next morning, Ada and Emeka sat by the lake, talking quietly while the rest of the students were still asleep. Ada explained everything. How she had come from the sea, how Mama Iridi had given her legs and the wheelchair, and how the spell would end in 3 months. 3 months, Emeka repeated, frowning. What happens after that? If I don't go back to the sea, I'll lose my voice forever, Ada said. And if I do go back, I can't come back here. Not like this. Emeka's jaw tightened. There has to be another way. Maybe we can talk to this Mama Iridi. She could give you more time or find a way to, I don't know, make you human permanently. It's not that simple, Ada said, shaking her head. Magic always comes with a price. If I ask for legs, I might have to give up something else. Then we'll figure it out, Emeka said firmly. Together, Ada looked at him, her heart swelling. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she wasn't facing it alone. Emeka was here, and he wasn't giving up on her. As the students packed up to leave the campsite, Ada couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. The lake had revealed her secret, but it had also strengthened her bond with Emeka. They still had a long way to go, but she was ready to face whatever came next. With Emeka by her side, she believed anything was possible. The bus ride back from the lake was quiet. Ada sat by the window, staring out at the passing trees, her thoughts tangled. Emeka sat next to her, his book unopened in his lap. He kept glancing at her, as if trying to find the right words to say. You're too quiet, Emeka said finally, breaking the silence. Ada turned to him, her lips pressing into a thin line. I'm thinking. About what? Emeka asked, tilting his head. About what happens next, Ada said softly. About everything, Emeka frowned, leaning closer. We'll figure it out, Ada. I told you, I'm not going anywhere. Ada gave him a small, sad smile. You say that now, but you don't understand what you're signing up for. Then help me understand, Emeka said, his voice firm. Don't push me away, Ada. Let me help. Ada sighed, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her skirt. What if helping me means giving up everything? What if it means leaving this world behind? Emeka's expression didn't waver. If it means being with you, then I'll do it. The sincerity in his voice made Ada's chest ache. She wanted to believe him, but the weight of her secret felt heavier than ever. Back at school, things returned to normal, or as normal as they could be. Ada and Emeka kept their conversations private, careful not to let anyone overhear. Tunji had backed off, but his glares from across the hallways told Ada that he hadn't forgotten the lake incident. One afternoon, as they sat in the garden, Emeka brought up the subject again. Have you thought about what you're going to do? Ada nodded, staring at the fountain. I have. There's only one way forward. What is it? Emeka asked, his voice filled with concern. I have to talk to Mama Iridi, Ada said. She's the only one who can help me. Then let's go, Emeka said immediately. Ada looked at him, surprised. You can't come. It's dangerous. Dangerous or not, I'm coming with you, Emeka said firmly. I'm not letting you face this alone. Ada hesitated, but the determination in Emeka's eyes was unwavering. Okay, she said finally, but you have to promise to follow my lead. I promise, Emeka said, giving her a reassuring smile. That evening, under the cover of darkness, Ada led Emeka to the shore. The moonlight danced on the waves, and the sound of the water calmed Ada's nerves. She turned to Emeka, who stood beside her, his expression a mix of curiosity and awe. This is where I'm from, Ada said softly, gesturing to the sea. This is home. Emeka looked out at the water, his face thoughtful. It's beautiful. Ada nodded, her heart pounding. Stay here. I'll call for her. Emeka started to protest, but Ada held up a hand. Please, trust me. Reluctantly, Emeka nodded, stepping back. Ada took a deep breath and waded into the water, her legs transforming back into her tail. The sensation was both familiar and strange after weeks of hiding. She swam a little farther out, then called into the waves. Mama Iridi, please, I need your help. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the water. Then, the waves began to ripple unnaturally, and a glowing figure emerged from the depths. Mama Iridi's silver hair flowed around her like seaweed, and her piercing eyes locked onto Ada. You've returned, Mama Iridi said, her voice both soothing and stern. Why have you called me? Ada glanced back at Emeka, who stood frozen on the shore, then turned back to the elder mermaid. I need more time. Mama Iridi frowned. More time? You were given 3 months. That was the bargain. I know, Ada said quickly, but things have changed. I found someone. He knows the truth and he wants to stay with me. Mama Iridi's gaze shifted to Emeka, who looked both awestruck and terrified. A human? Yes, Ada said, her voice firm. He's different. He doesn't see me as a monster. He wants to help. Mama Iridi's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained serious. Love is a powerful thing, child, but it comes with sacrifice. What are you willing to give? Ada hesitated, her mind racing. What do you mean? If you wish to remain on land, you must give up something of equal value, Mama Iridi said. Your voice, your tale, your memories of the sea. These are the prices you must consider. Ada's heart sank. She had always known there would be a cost, but hearing it aloud made it feel real. And if I choose to stay in the sea, then the human must join you, Mama Iridi said simply. He will leave his world behind and become one of us. Ada turned to Emeka, who had stepped closer to the water, listening intently. You don't have to do this, she said, her voice trembling. You can still walk away. Emeka shook his head. I'm not walking away, Ada. Whatever the price is, we'll face it together. Tears filled Ada's eyes as she looked at him. You don't know what you're saying. Yes, I do, Emeka said, his voice steady. I love you, Ada, and I'm not letting you go. Mama Iridi watched the exchange silently, then nodded. Very well. The choice is yours, child. But choose wisely. Love is not without its trials. Ada looked between Mama Iridi and Emeka, her heart torn. She knew there was no easy answer, but she also knew she couldn't live without Emeka. Taking a deep breath, she made her decision. I'll stay on land, Ada said, her voice firm. But I'll give up my voice. Emeka's eyes widened. Ada, no. You don't have to. It's the only way, Ada said, cutting him off. If I keep my tail, I can't be with you. And if you come to the sea, you'll lose everything. This is the only way we can be together. You don't have to do this, Emeka said, breaking the quiet. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed his worry. We'll find another way. There isn't another way, Ada said softly, her voice trembling. The spell is going to end, Emeka. If I don't choose, I'll lose everything. My legs, my chance to stay on land. And if I go back to the sea, I'll lose you. Emeka stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. Then let me come with you. Ada's eyes widened, and she shook her head quickly. No, you can't. The sea isn't your world. You'll lose everything. Your life, your family, your dreams. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking, Emeka said firmly. I'm offering. Ada, I don't care where we are, as long as I'm with you. Tears pricked at Ada's eyes. You say that now, but you don't know what it's like. The ocean is different. It's not safe. And even if you could come, it's not fair to you. Emeka took her hands in his gaze unwavering. What's not fair is asking you to give up everything for me. I won't let you sacrifice your voice. Ada, you love to sing. You love to talk. Taking that away would be like taking away a part of who you are. Ada's chest tightened. She knew he was right, but the decision still felt impossible. Then what do we do? Have you come to a decision? Mama Iridi asked, her voice carrying the weight of the sea. Ada glanced at Emeka before turning back to the elder mermaid. I can't give up my voice, she said firmly. But I can't go back to the sea either. There has to be another way. Mama Iridi tilted her head, her gaze thoughtful. Another way always comes with a price, child. Are you ready to face it? Ada hesitated, her fingers curling into fists. What is the price? The bond you share with this human, Mama Iridi said, gesturing to Emeka. It is strong, but love in your world will require balance. If you wish to stay on land, you must anchor yourself to him. Your magic will fade, and you will become fully human. Fully human? Ada whispered, her voice filled with both wonder and fear. Yes, Mama Iridi said. You will lose your connection to the sea, to your kind. You will no longer be a mermaid. Your home will be here on land with him. Ada's breath caught in her throat. The sea had always been her home, but now it felt like a distant dream. Was she ready to leave it behind forever? She turned to Emeka, whose expression was filled with determination. I'll be with you, he said softly. Whatever you choose, I'll be by your side. Tears streamed down Ada's cheeks as she turned back to Mama Iridi. If I choose to become human, what happens to my memories of the sea? Of my family? They will remain, Mama Iridi said. You will remember who you are and where you came from, but you will no longer be able to return. Ada nodded slowly, her heart heavy. She had always felt out of place in the sea, but the thought of never swimming through its depths again was painful. Still, she knew what she had to do. I choose to stay on land, she said, her voice steady. I'll become human. Mama Iridi's expression softened, and she raised her hands. The water around her began to glow, swirling with light. Very well. The bond between you and this human will anchor your transformation. It is his love that will make you whole. Emeka stepped closer to Ada, his hand reaching for hers. I'm here, he said softly. You're not alone. The light grew brighter, surrounding Ada in a warm, gentle embrace. She felt a tingling sensation in her legs, and when she looked down, her tail had disappeared, replaced by 2 human legs. The transformation was painless, but it left her feeling lightheaded. When the light faded, Mama Iridi stepped back, her expression unreadable. "It is done. You are human now, Ada. The sea will always call to you, but you must not answer." Ada nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. Mama Iridi gave her a small, knowing smile. "Be happy, child. And remember, love is a gift, but it must be nurtured." With that, the elder mermaid disappeared into the waves, leaving Ada and Emeka alone on the shore. Emeka knelt beside Ada, his hands gently supporting her as she adjusted to her new legs. "Can you stand?" he asked, his voice full of concern. "I think so," Ada said, her voice shaky. With his help, she pushed herself up, her legs wobbly but steady enough to hold her weight. "You're doing great," Emeka said, a proud smile spreading across his face. Ada laughed softly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I can't believe it. I'm really human." "You are," Emeka said, his voice filled with awe. "And you're incredible." Ada leaned into him, her heart full despite the bittersweet ache of leaving the sea behind. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she wouldn't face it alone. "Let's go home," Emeka said, wrapping an arm around her for support. As they walked away from the shore, Ada glanced back at the water one last time. The ocean would always be a part of her, but her heart was here now, with Emeka. Together, they stepped into their new life, ready to face whatever came next. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a like and subscribe. Here is another interesting story to watch. Click to watch now.